Hey, Fanboy Nation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
We're watching
You're watching Fanboy.
Fanboy.
A fanboy, etc.
Fanboy Nation.
God, I assume Tom.
This afternoon, I have the pleasure of speaking with Mark Russell. You might not know his face, but you know his work with Judge Dredd, the Flintstones, and his latest graphic novel, Billionaire Island. Mark, how are you today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, man. I enjoyed the book to the point that you didn't just take it to a one-sided perspective and only punch at rich conservatives, and you didn't just praise rich liberals. Like, you took it to both of them and said, look, rich liberals have this sense of being this fake altruistic, BS of putting their name on things. I mean, you even punched at Bill Gates with his eugenics ideologies, and then you punched at rich conservatives that are like, yeah, we're rich, we don't care, fuck you.
There's a lot of boots to go around, a lot of asses that need them.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have been so polarized that they think if you semi-agree with me or you pretend to agree with me that you're just A-okay.
Right.
Tell me how this came about, because, Billionaire Island itself, it's a bit of a dig at the whole Jeffrey Epstein scandal, which was obviously a tragedy and everything else that went along with that. And that's still being investigated. To a lesser extent, I think it should still be a bigger story. But was that part of the influence? Like, what was the catalyst to bring us to Millionaire Island?
Well, not Epstein specifically, but Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein. And a lot of it was just like about how the concept of Billionaire Island is how do people with large amounts of money, how people with resources escape responsibility? How do they escape accountability? And the island is just sort of the ultimate expression of that. Like, this is how we get around all legal accountability whatsoever, because we're not even in your own country. We're in a country that we rule, and the laws are whatever we say they are at any given moment. And I just think that's sort of the natural expression of where the world is heading. I mean, with the Panama Papers, we learned about how people on left and right, people with tons of money, are like basically stashing enormous resources offshore in ways that they can't be taxed. And also, one of the things that inspired the story was was reading about how billionaires are actually building like bug out bunkers in New Zealand and other places of the world, precisely so they can hide and wait out the end of the world at a minimum of expense to them, while the rest of us, fight over the remaining cans of soup.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate situation, but it leads to question, what happens when you're the poorest of the billionaires?
Yeah,
Steve
right.
only has $3 billion, while Mike over here has $14 billion. So he's still richer than Steve, even though at that point, like for you and I, wouldn't notice the difference.
Yeah, part of the problem is that once you accept the sort of hierarchical view of human beings, that being rich means you're morally superior, or being rich means that you are more deserving of the wealth you have than somebody who has less, then what happens when you sequester yourself to an island where everybody's a billionaire? That natural sort of ideology of hierarchy that you've already accepted then just sort of like gets narrowed down to be. And so, yeah, the people with only $1 billion or $2 billion are like the lepers in this in this new Billionaire Island. And in fact, the most respected person on Billionaire Island, who is in fact a dog, is also the richest. And that automatically, according to the rules of Billionaire Island, makes him sort of the chairman of the board, who gets final say in all collective decisions. And it just happens to be a dog whose sort of unorthodox investing strategy has netted him billions upon billions of dollars.
That actually reminds me of an old Soviet cartoon from the 1950s where a dog was elected to Senate because he had enough money to buy his way in. I don't know if you had seen that cartoon in the past.
No, but yeah, same idea, I guess.
Okay, I'll find the name of the cartoon and send it to you. But there's also that dog that's a mayor somewhere here in the United States.
But what the business dog was sort of, yeah, that's true. It's like we already got mayor dog. Business dog can't be too far away. But really what that was a sort of a metaphor for was, like, I was reading this article about how money managers and the people who, the hedge fund managers who we give, who make top dollar, the richest, like sort of salaried employees in America, regularly underperform the market. Like by overall, they, on average, they underperform the market, which means you'd be better off like consulting a magic 8-ball and investing how the magic 8-ball told you to invest than you would putting your money with one of these like people that gets extremely rich for investing other people's money. So I thought, well, what would be the ultimate expression of that? And it'd just be like the richest, hedge fund money manager in the world would be this dog who just picks which stocks he's going to invest in based upon which bowl he eats out of. And if the odds played out, he would outperform most of the hedge fund market.
It's like playing tic-tac-toe with that chicken at the county fair.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Except, they're losing to the chicken.
And in this case, the dog is the boss that everyone has to follow and essentially sniff his behind, which sounds like politics in the corporate world today.
Right. It's sort of about how their own ideology, if they believe it, if their own sort of like belief in like power and wealth is equivalent to like sort of moral weight, is self-defeating in the end.
With the way the books come about, it's satirical. You and Steve, and I can't pronounce Steve's last name properly. If you could help me with that. Q. Thank you.
Like you smell something horrible.
Well, luckily his art's fantastic. So
yeah, no, it is.
I think he had to redeem that last name that way, I guess. But you've worked with Steve before, and Steve's a great artist, and you're a great writer, and satire has kind of become your bread and butter at this point with this and Second Coming and a couple of other stuff that you've done. When you see what you've satirized, and then you see it slowly start to become reality instead of satire, like I'm going to pick on Senator Romney for a moment. When Mitt Romney was running for president, we found out that he was only paying 15% in income tax because Mitt Romney owned zero and everything was offshore. And now that he's one of the only Republicans that's publicly come out against President Trump, now he's this altruistic, reasonable of the people type. Like,
all like odiousness is sort of relative, and so it's like people tend to look better throughout history just by virtue of the fact of being replaced by people even worse than they are. I mean, look at like the rehabilitation George W. Bush has undergone in the last 4 years, despite the fact that he, got us in 2 sort of failed wars and, bankrupted the country and took $2 trillion out of Social Security and may have capsized the retirements for millions of people. He still looks good compared to like what came after, the President Trump.
My family's from the Middle East, so we have our issues with Bush, and we really hate Jimmy Carter because of what he did to Iran and where my father's family's from. But I joke with people and say that George W. Bush is my favorite president simply because in 2008, when he got on Air Force One, he went away. And we've seen him maybe 3 times since. It's
true. I think part of that was just like embarrassment, hopefully. Maybe I'm projecting, but I hope a lot of it was just realizing how toxic he had made his, or how toxic like his name had become.
Right. Well, hopefully every president from here on out can learn from the George W. Bush model.
No, I think it's good. I think it's good. Go away for a while. We don't need to hear from you. We need to be able to look forward.
Right. Now, with Billionaire Island, is this also published by Ahoy?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about your relationship with Ahoy, how that came about.
Well, it actually came about in a hotel lobby. I was at New York Comic Con a few years ago, and I happened to see Stuart Moore in the lobby at the hotel I was staying at. And so I went to say hi, because I know Stuart from DC, and he just happened to be meeting with like Tom Peyer and Hart Seeley, the editor-in-chief and publisher of Ahoy. And they were there in the lobby, like putting together Ahoy, the company. And I was there literally at the meeting where they were talking about it. And, they mentioned what they were doing. And from the go, I just thought that sounded like a fantastic company to work for. So I said, well, here's my email, contact me if you need anything. And so they hit me up for some contributions to the Edgar Allan Poe Snifter of Terror, which was one of the first comics they published So I sent them a script based upon these sort of gothic horror stories I'd written based upon the breakfast cereal guys like Count Chocula and Frankenberry. But I tried to like write them as like this real sort of gothic horror, this sort of Game of Thrones like intrigue and betrayal. And they've been running those stories in the Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terrors. That was sort of my first experience with them. And I've also submitted a lot of like little prose pieces to them, which is another thing I think is really unique and great about Ahoy, is that they're not just about comics. They're more about this sort of, they're more of like a literary digest, because they will take short stories and poems and cartoons and stuff that you don't normally see in a comic book and put them in there. They're really about creating this more sort of like the sensibility, this reading experience than they are just a comic book company. So go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. So yeah, I've had a really good relationship with them from the beginning.
A lot of people keep saying that the comic book industry is a dying market. You know, print is dead, this is dead, that's dead, et cetera, et cetera. But
yeah,
you know, it's an adult readership. It's not the kid stuff that it had been promoted for so long. And I think it's been really an adult readership more so since the 70s and 80s than anything. Having worked for DC and Marvel, you know, the big two, and then being able to do a lot of creator-owned stuff on your own, how much of a creative outlet do you feel that, you know, like something like Billionaire Island allows you to express yourself more and just be Mark Russell rather than Mark Russell writing the Flintstones or Judge Dredd or whomever?
I feel like, yeah, it's a lot easier. It's a double-edged sword, because it's a lot easier to get your ideas out the way you want them when you're dealing with completely creator-owned, self-generated characters. But at the same time, what you lose is that cultural equity. Like, people would read my work in the Flintstones not knowing anything about me, just because they knew that the Flintstones were. Or, you know, I didn't have to do a lot of character building, because people came into the Flintstones comic knowing who Fred Flintstone was, knowing who Wilma Flintstone was. So you have that cultural equity when you're writing a pre-existing intellectual property like the Flintstones or like Batman or whatever, that you don't when you're creating your own work. But yeah, like you said, it's a trade-off, because what you gain from doing your own creator-owned work is the complete freedom. Like, you couldn't have Batman say convert to Scientology or something like that. But you could if you had like your own sort of superhero that you'd created on your own. You could have them do whatever you want. You could have them like start a cult. You could have them, you know, die from an allergic to like tree nuts. You know, you could do anything you want with them.
Well, speaking of Batman, since he is a billionaire and we are talking about Billionaire Island, where would he fit in all of this? You know, with Wayne Tech Enterprises.
Well, I think that like Batman and, you know, and Iron Man are sort of like what we imagined the billionaires would be like back when our idea of American corporate wealth was like IBM and you know, these companies that like looked out for their employees and bought like, you know, healthcare for all their employees and had like country clubs that anybody working for them could go to. That was sort of our conception of like, well, this is what corporate might and like billionaire wealth does. It raises the tide for everyone. It takes care of us. It protects us. But in the age of Mitt Romney and private equity, it's not really how it works anymore. It's more about cutting costs and letting the dead weight go, and keeping the profits in terms of executive bonuses, as opposed to like taking care of the people that are employed under you. So I think that looking at that sort of wealth and the sort of mindset of late stage American capitalism, Billionaire Island is much more like what like a Tony Stark or, you know, or like Batman would do with billions of dollars today, you know, with the mindset of billionaires as it is now.
You know, there was the rumor, I don't have confirmation, so I'm going to leave it as rumor, that when people were leaving the Bay Area during the rise of the pandemic and going to Phoenix or Denver and realizing that they could buy a house and their mortgage would still be cheaper than the studio apartment they were living in San Francisco, that Facebook decided to adjust their salary based on their cost of living in their new state, rather than allow them to retain their salary that they were making in California, because Phoenix is cheaper. So guess what? We're going to lower your annual salary to whatever would be comparable to what you were making over there.
A lowering tide lowers all boats,
Yeah. That's got to be the most disgusting thing, especially if we've signed a contract to agree to pay for for my wages for XYZ, especially if I'm doing the same job.
Yeah, it's a little. I'm not sure how they can unilaterally negotiate a contract like that, but I'm sure if there is a way, Facebook has found it.
Which is unfortunate. But you work for DC with the Flintstones, and that's well, if you don't live in LA anymore, so we can't pay you LA rates for the same work that you do.
Yeah.
But it's still coming off the same PC or Mac that you've been working on for the past 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's what sort of what private enterprise has become in the 21st century, especially in the age of sort of private equity, is largely about not about how do we create new products, how do we innovate. It's more how do we find ways to nickel and dime the people that are working for us, or to squeeze extra nickels and dimes out of the customers. So I think that's where all the real innovation is now. It's not really about making life better and creating new things. It's more about squeezing out of the existing things and finding ways to sort of make your grift more efficient.
Well, there's one panel early on in the book, and this is one of the rare spoilers that we're going to give, but you kind of dump on Chuck E. Cheese, where one of the employees sits there and says, "But I have a PhD," and the boss says, "I don't care. You still have to clear out the ball pit." And it's also come to that level of egotism where I have higher education, so I deserve more respect, but there's no jobs for your higher education.
Yeah.
So really, who cares that you're a PhD? Your degree is worthless at that point.
Yeah, it's about how we sort of have not created any good opportunities for all the people that we're sending through higher education. I mean, when I went to college, it was sort of just assumed that you get a bachelor's degree, you're set. Somebody's going to hire you. You'll be a middle class person for sure once you've got that bachelor's degree. But now you got people with master's degrees and even PhDs who are having to take jobs as baristas. And so to me, it wasn't really so much about Chuck E. Cheese or this guy's hubris of expecting a good job because he's got a PhD.
Yeah.
I would think you probably do deserve a good job if you've got a PhD. It's more just about how the economy has not really kept up with the imagination of or the needs of the American society.
Right. But like myself, I have advanced degrees, and I got very used to hearing you're overqualified for everything.
Yeah.
And then I had an acquaintance of mine who was a doctor in biology and couldn't get a job, so he took his PhD and his master's off there to get an entry-level position. Yeah. And then they fired him once they found out he was a doctor because they couldn't raise his salary to a PhD level. So it's very strange.
Absolutely the backwards way to think about it. It's not that you're overqualified; it's that the economy is under-imaginative. So the economy is under-equipped to deal with these assets, which are incredibly educated people.
Right. Like when I was getting my teaching credential, for example, I already had an advanced degree, and they told me I was going to be a hard hire because it was cheaper to get 2 people with a bachelor's degree than to hire me with a master's degree. Right. Never mind that I already had an expertise in the field and had written, a master's thesis on something. I was still overqualified, and it was cheaper to hire 2 people with less education to do the same job I could have. So, I wrote
a thing about that in the Flintstones, one of the episodes, Professor Sargon basically fired his chief scientist to bring on Pebbles and Bam Bam as interns to do the work that this sort of trained scientist had done. And of course it goes disastrously wrong. But I think that that's in a lot of ways what's happening in, American industry right now is they're finding that the ways to sort of get the quarterly bonuses is by mortgaging the future of the company and the future of our country by getting rid of qualified, educated people and replacing it with basically, glorified interns.
The old Greek ideology was, men will plant trees that they will never sit under their shade. Yeah. And that's, and that was Mesopotamia, that was Persia, Phoenicia, et cetera, that the idea was to create something for future generations, even though we don't benefit from it now. And yet, our foundation of capitalism is based on Calvinism. Idle hands are the devil's plaything. And so we work and we produce more, but we give glory to God from that respect. But once we removed God from the equation, it became the aspect of work to produce to maintain, and then greed settles in on top of what was supposed to be rejected, and now that's the fruits of our labor from the greed aspect of capitalism rather than the contributing to society from it.
Yeah, you could make the argument that like sort of American politics and economics are all kind of based on the book of Revelation, which is like the end is coming, so why bother? You know, it's like why would I plant a tree that even my kids won't be around to sit under? But yeah, it's completely like stripped us of like any sort of idea of general reciprocity, or like the idea that we are building something better for the generations that come after us, or even that we have any sort of indebtedness to them.
Do you think that level of greed has also been taught? I mean, in the 80s we had Wall Street, and then eventually we had the sequel to it where, Gordon Gekko says, not only is greed good, it's legal. And we kind of live that aspect now.
Well, I think it's the sort of umbrella that a lot of them hide under. It's like, well, I didn't do anything illegal, but it's only because they have got so much money that they are able to like buy the laws. They're able to like legalize things like the pyramid schemes. They just call them multi-level marketing now. But things like Amway or Nutra, I forget what it's called, Nutrisystem or whatever, like these pyramid schemes that are completely legalized, not because there's nothing wrong with them, but because the people who stand to like make money off the grift have gotten enough lobbyists together to push it through. Right. So it's really the umbrella. It's a flimsy umbrella, but one which seems to keep them all out of the rain. Right. The idea, well, I didn't do anything illegal.
Yeah, that's society though. You took several months to write this, and this is coming out towards the end of the first wave of COVID as we're heading into a second wave. And I don't know where you stand, whether you believe that the flu shot is also contributing to it because it lowers your immune system as well, and that's another reason for the spike. That's one theory.
Well, from what I've heard is like the scientists are recommending both, and I usually get the flu shot anyway, so I'm going to go with that until I know better. But yeah, I would encourage everyone to like get the flu shot, and then also to get the vaccine for COVID-19 when it is available.
But with that and both aspects of that, what was something that you were writing that you're like, this is so far-fetched for this book? I mean, it's roughly 140 pages in Billionaire Island. Like, this is far-fetched. This is too extreme. And then now you're seeing as news breaks going, oh my God, I was spot on as this is going through.
Well, I think the big thing that I thought, this is maybe as far out there as this goes, is like the hamster cage, them just like operating private prisons inside their homes. But as I see the rule of law getting sort of increasingly ignored, and even on the streets of Portland where I live, we had like unmarked vehicles for the Department of Homeland Security just sort of like randomly approaching people who hadn't even committed any crime, and just sort of abducting them off the street and holding them sometimes for days. So I thought that's really not too far-fetched. That basically the only thing that keeps this sort of kidnapping from becoming legal is people's willingness to not do it. And as soon as that willingness to observe those norms is gone, they'll find a way to make it legal, whether it's by citing general anti-protest declarations, or by building a prison offshore, which we already did, by the way, with Guantanamo Bay. It's essentially what we did was just sort of kidnap people and stash them in Guantanamo Bay, which we could do legally because it was offshore. It wasn't beholden to American law.
Yeah, well, it's Cuba, so that made me laugh on top of it, that it was Cuba, which we had horrible relations with at the time, and we still haven't really fully opened up relations with now.
Yeah, that was sort of that's probably where we should have known that American democracy was in serious trouble, was when they were able to get away with the argument like, well, it's okay for us to basically kidnap people and stash them indefinitely in Guantanamo Bay because it's in Cuba. And then when Cuba's like, well, if it's in Cuba, it's sovereign territory, we choose to let them go. And they're like, nope, you have no sovereignty. So basically, we at that point we should have known that they'd found a loophole through which they can do basically anything.
Oh. It's going to be interesting to see what the next 5 years holds for any of us.
Yeah.
as things die down with the pandemic, or as they start to increase, actually, because the numbers keep going up. What's going on in Europe? What's going to happen over there?
Yeah.
Brexit was something that was an issue that we had to pay attention to. So these are very interesting times.
They're absolutely very interesting times, and also very scary times. And I think that if you look at the 1918 influenza, the so-called Spanish flu, as like sort of an analog, it's very troubling because most people who died in that died in the second wave. They had an initial wave in the spring, like we did with COVID, that killed a few million people worldwide, and then like 50 to 100 million people died like in the second wave in the winter, because everyone's going indoors, and the virus was already sort of spread to most of the countries in the world by the time winter came around. So yeah, well, hold on, it's going to be a bumpy ride, I think.
With everything that you're doing, you're a creative person. Steve's clearly a creative person as well. You put this graphic novel together. Do you listen to any of the conspiracy theories that have come out in the last 9 months and sit there and go, this will make a phenomenal graphic novel?
I've sort of, it's because I don't want to give credence to them. I don't want people to think I believe this, but yeah, it's sort of hard not to like think, oh, that'd be a great story when you hear something, like, in fact, like when I was writing Prez for DC, I had like the cabal of the billionaires, the CEOs who own the companies or who run the companies, like they met at a fast food restaurant called Build a Burger. And so they were like the Build a Burger group. But yeah, it is kind of like fascinating just to see what they come up with, and how they imagine these conspiracies work. And of course, Billionaire Island is kind of built upon a conspiracy too, the conspiracy of like spreading this sterility virus through the food of AgroCorp.
Right, like attacking Monsanto for that as well.
Yeah, sort of like, I'm not saying Monsanto's doing that, but I'm saying that this is something it's a plot device to like get to the point where like this is how they expect Billionaire Island to actually work. They expect it to work by like knocking as much of the world population out as they possibly can before the end comes, so then they'll be able to defend Billionaire Island by force if need be.
Right. So it looks like Alex Jones is doing everybody a favor with creating some of these stories or pushing these narratives to create more.
Yeah, I really don't want people to think that I actually think this is what's going on, or that I'm going to be appearing on InfoWars or anything like that. But yeah, it's hard not to like take this wackiness and sort of run with it as an inspiration for crafting stories.
Or you could be Tucker Carlson and jump from CNN to MSNBC to Fox News, whichever one gives you the biggest paycheck to push their narrative.
Yeah. Preferably not. I prefer not to ever be equated to Tucker Carlson, but yeah, something like that.
At least maybe paycheck wise.
Oh yeah, paycheck wise, I'd love to be a perfect allegory for Tucker Carlson.
With everything going on and being a creative, especially at this time, the hamster wheel is also a great visual, especially since so many people I know have bought stationary bikes, especially one company that is $2,500 for the bike plus a $100 membership to use their product. How do you allow your creativity to continue to flow, having been on lockdown in Portland?
Yeah, it's hard because, I'm used to being able to go out and write somewhere like at a library or a coffee shop or somewhere. And it's nice to get away from home where you're not surrounded by temptations to go to the fridge or, to turn on the TV or people just sort of interfering with you. So it is harder to work at home than it was before. And also, yeah, just the sort of sense like the world is sort of falling apart around you is also really hard to work through. But, I think that, we are adaptive creatures and we adapt to the circumstances. So I feel like even though it's been a challenge, your mind just sort of adapts to the challenge because what other choice does it have?
There's the old saying that 3 a.m. is the hour of artists and poets. And, we've kind of entered this Huxley world of information overload, the way Brave New World had predicted. And, we have social media 24 hours a day, 24-hour news cycle, people arguing online over stuff that doesn't even make sense. All that building up. How does that affect your creative mindset when you have all these distractions, whether you're working at home or say you went to a coffee house in downtown Portland and hearing the conversations as people are just glued to their screens on their tablets and phones.
Well, I think this is what they mean by allostatic load. It's like things that are causing you stress that aren't necessarily in your life, but just the general angst of absorbing everything around you causes you so much stress that you can't function anymore. And I think that's definitely been a factor. Like, I feel like I have gotten a lot less done this year than I would have if I had been living in a different sort of political and media environment. But, you know, the show and therefore the work must go on. So I just have forced myself to get through it when it was hard. And I realize it's a somewhat cavalier thing to say because not everyone has that option. People are, you know, sometimes debilitated by it, or they have very real physical and or mental barriers to completing the things they've had to do. But luckily for me, I've been able to, like, at least keep a semblance of my artistic pace, even under these conditions.
I wanted to touch real quick on Second Coming. It does satirize Christianity quite a bit. Well, the whole thing is satirizing Christianity, and it's real easy that people pick on Christianity in the Western world. I know, you know, being of Middle Eastern ancestry and also a Middle Eastern Christian, we're so used to it over there that when we come over here and we see people making fun of it and then talking about Christian persecution in the United States, we kind of laugh at them. Did that book come about because of a Protestant upbringing of yours? Did you grow up evangelical or high church Protestant?
Yeah, I grew up evangelical, and it's largely talking about Christianity from that perspective, or what's wrong, my critique of Christianity as it is taught through evangelical churches, because that's what I know. That's what I grew up in. And it's not really that I'm making fun of Christianity. It's more that I'm making fun of Christian institutions, which I think is very different. Because in fact, in the story, Christ comes out as the hero. He's the one who sort of like is wise and ultimately is like demonstrates that he has something to teach the world and something to teach Sunstar, even though he was sent there by God to learn from Sunstar. He's the one that's like shows him another way other than just violence through which to heal the world. And it really is more about, like, my critique of Christianity is like, it would be a lot better if they actually paid more attention to Christ. If they actually like read the New Testament and based their teachings on what Christ actually said and did, as opposed to just sort of doing whatever it takes, no matter how immoral, to prop up the institutions that you've built around him.
Right, and that's always been my issue with the evangelical movement, is that when people would jump from passage to passage to push their argument and saying, see, I was right here, because they've cherry picked numerous verses to make that argument on their behalf.
Yeah, that's silly. That's just like Magic the Gathering for, you know, for fundamentalists, because individual verses by themselves don't mean a whole lot. It's really all contextual. I think you should read the Bible and understand the Bible based upon the books. You should try to read each book of the Bible and understand it as a whole, because this is the author's complete message, and this is where you get what they're trying to say about God and what God wants from them. Individual verses can be abused in any number of ways, because sometimes they are taken grossly out of context. Sometimes they are directly contradicted, or they're setting up an argument that the author of the book is going to knock down in the next verse. So using individual verses in some sort of theological catfight doesn't really impress me. It just shows me that you've bought some Magic the Gathering cards.
Hey, sounds just like politics and picking and choosing the law from the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always joke when people want to argue, you know, for or against the Second Amendment, and whichever your stance, that's your business. But then I always ask them what the 16th Amendment is, and they looked at me completely perplexed, which is government issuing income tax. So I was like, if you're going to want to revoke any of them, that would be the one I'd want to revoke first.
Yeah, the amendments are, especially like, I think the thing that people use the others' ignorance of the Constitution and how it works is like a tool to get them to do what they want. Like Trump always saying, if you elect Biden, they're going to come after your Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment's in the Bill of Rights. It's not like Biden can just sort of wave a wand and disband the Second Amendment. But the Romans called liberal arts education what liberal arts education because liberal meant free. And so this is what they thought you need to know in order to be a free person living in society. You need to know how not to get bamboozled. You need to know what your rights are. You need to know how the institutions of your government function. And we've really gotten away from that in this country. We don't really give kids liberal arts education in school anymore. We've taken civics out of the curriculum. Most people grow up never knowing how their government works. Most people, I bet most adult Americans, if you ask them right now, could not even name the 3 branches of government outside maybe their own sort of senators or congressmen. They probably couldn't name more than like 2 or 3 other senators or congressmen. We are woefully ignorant of our own of the government upon which we all rely and how it operates. And that's like I don't think it's an unintentional result in American life. I think it's been, we've been sort of winnowed away from understanding our own institutions for the benefit of those who want to use us as, demagogues, basically.
Right. And then the legalese and the language that is intended to confuse people makes them disenfranchised and run away from the idea of politics and civics anyway.
Yeah. And it's like one begets the other. The more you sort of disenfranchise people from these institutions, the less they are able to sort of use them to their advantage. So the more disenfranchised they feel. And the people who have the lobbyists and control the system, then benefit from that because you're not interfering with their plans.
Well, dare I say, at this point, you've become a satirist in your creative works, which a lot of them find dangerous because you kind of push the button and pulling back the curtain on revealing what they actually do. You've satirized religion, you've satirized the financial institutions and the 1%. Is satirizing politics the next wave that's going into an Ahoy book?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think about what is sort of gnawing at me at the time. It's not terribly calculated. I just think, well, what is it that I'm thinking about a lot these days? And whether I want to or not, that's usually what sort of leaks out into my writing. So Billionaire Island, I think, was very much about like sort of how gross inequality is going to basically doom the human race unless we do something about it. And I don't know what the next sort of satire is going to be, but I like the idea that I now have the freedom to sort of like pick and choose these topics and get them published in a creator-owned sort of way that I can talk about whatever I want. So we'll see.
And you had Bendis write the intro to it, and he even jokes that he's going to be careful with his words because he might be working for one of those billionaires at the moment.
Yeah, we all are. I'm working for AT&T, albeit as a peon, as a for hire employee, not like as anybody they have to actually pay attention to. But yeah, we all are in some way or another working for billionaires.
Right. And in that regard, doesn't it become a bit of a hindrance? Because, I joke that like I have friends that work for Mickey Mouse and I have friends that work for Bugs Bunny. And then, the few that work for Woody Woodpecker over at Comcast. And I use those, I use those characters as a joke, but essentially that's kind of what you're doing. What is it like now that the merger has happened between Warner Brothers Media and AT&T? Has that affected anything at DC for you guys? Because I know you just got a brand new editor-in-chief over there.
Yeah, Marie Javins is the new editor-in-chief, which is, great. I'm a big fan of Marie. She's actually the one who sort of discovered me and gave me a career in comics. So I'm a huge fan of Marie for obvious reasons. And yeah, and there's also been like a lot of layoffs over there. And I don't know. I mean, again, I'm looking down from like the peon level. So it's sort of like sitting in the 300 seats in a stadium and then thinking what goes on in the locker room. So I don't no idea what has gone into these decisions to lay people off, but and I don't know how much of it is like from the merger of AT&T, but I do think it's a bad thing. I'm not happy at all to see a lot of these people who I knew personally and were fantastic employees and great at their jobs suddenly being forced out while the company was still profitable and while the sales of comics are still strong. I don't understand, other than like, as I was discussing earlier, trying to make money through purging costs as opposed to making more products.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the near future, but I'm glad that at least DC is still alive and kicking and doing what they can with what's going on over at HBO Max now that DC Universe has been dissolved. But Doom Patrol and Titans and the Harley Quinn cartoon and everything else, Swamp Thing might get a second life on CW with the season 2 now that that's happened. But
I'm glad that a lot of that stuff is going over to HBO Max because DCU was doing some really great stuff and innovative stuff. With particularly the Harley Quinn cartoon, I just thought was fantastic. So I'm glad to see it still being available to the public.
I would be remiss to ask this, since you're a comic book creator, when you see one of your comic book stories get adapted, whether into an animated episode or as a feature, or inspire, like, the movie Dredd came out several years ago, something that you could have worked on with that be adapted to it. How excited are you for that? And how twisted do you feel like they took away from the original story, where they could have used the concept that was already there and in some instances might have ruined it or watered it down?
Well, I've never had the privilege actually of seeing one of my, sort of comic book ideas adapted to the screen yet. I imagine it will be thrilling. But yeah, I think you have to sort of understand that that's a different medium, that what you wrote was a comic. And if they're making a TV or a show or a movie out of it, that's got to sort of exist as its own animal. It can't be a direct one-for-one representation of what you wrote as a comic book, because every medium sort of exists in its own sort of, it all has its own sort of vocabulary. So you have to be okay with that, especially if you're writing not creator-owned stuff, but for a big 2 property, and then they use that. You should just be honored. I mean, other than you should also, I think, expect some extra remuneration because they're using your ideas in a profitable format. But beyond that, I think you should be honored to see it on screen and understand that it's going to be different than what you wrote.
All right. Well, let's take Billionaire Island in that regard. Let's say you get a 10-episode, 1-season story to tell the entire graphic novel. Where would you like to see it end up that would best fit the story the way you've written it? And who do you think you would want as a couple of cast members?
Oh, wow. Billionaire Island, I think, would probably be best as a movie, as a self-contained movie, like a 2-hour movie. And I think I would like to see, I would have to have an open casting for Business Dog. I don't have any dog in mind that I think would be perfect for that role. Maybe someone like, I don't know. Oh, I'm going to give some really bad casting suggestions here. I'm not even going to try it. It's just going to be stupid. I'm going to make myself look like an idiot if I try to cast these roles.
Well, how about I cast Business Dog
you
for
do
you,
it,
and we use Mayor Dog.
You can be my casting agent.
All right, I'll use Mayor Dog as Business Dog for this.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, see, you're already better than I am at this game.
Mark, we got a few bucks. We're picking up some graphic novels. Whether we're going to order them online or we're going to actually physically go to a comic book store that's open in our state. Give me one reason why we got to shell out our hard-earned cash to pick up Billionaire Island, on November 24th.
Well, if you like the comic, there's some really cool extras in the Billionaire Island trade paperback. For one thing, as you mentioned, Brian Michael Bendis does the introduction, which is great in and of itself. And then you also get a fully labeled, colorized tourist map of Billionaire Island drawn by Steve Pugh. You get to see the whole island like you were if you were going to SeaWorld or something. They have all the little locations numbered and spelled out, which I think is probably my favorite extra in the book. And then you also get some of his character designs and a little foreword by myself. So I think there's a lot of really cool little extras in the trade paperback that you couldn't have gotten in the individual comics.
Well, it's a fun graphic novel. It comes out November 24th. Mark Russell, thank you so much for your time. Steve Pugh is a tremendous artist, so you guys are a great tag team in this. Where can we find you on social media if we want to connect with you?
The best place is Twitter. I'm on Twitter pretty much constantly, and my handle is @Manruss, MANRUSS. So I hope to see you there.
Perfect. Mark Russell, thank you so much. Billionaire Island comes to graphic novel form on November 24th. Please check it out. There's some great bonus features in there. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
All right.